The dark romance builder, powerful noble, slapped a disabled little girl in a tavern. What happened will shock you. The girl couldn't have been more than 7. She stood on one leg and a crutch in the middle of the Thornfield Tavern, her left foot twisted inward from birth, a bowl of soup clutched against her chest. She was trying to reach her mother at the bar when Lord Aldrich Voss, third cousin to the king and warden of the Eastern Province, struck her across the face so hard the bowl shattered on the stone floor. What happened next would destroy a noble house, expose a 20-year conspiracy, and bind 2 people together in a love so brutal and so tender it would reshape the entire Eastern court. But first, a woman no one expected stepped between the most powerful man in the province and a bleeding child, and she did it without saying a single word. Her name was Sarah Marin, and she was about to become the most dangerous woman in Lord Voss's life. This is that story. Sarah heard the slap before she saw it. The sound was wet, palm against a small cheek already damp from the steam of broth. She was sitting in the back corner of the Thornfield Tavern, her fingers wrapped around a mug she hadn't drunk from in an hour, her hood pulled forward enough to shadow her face. She'd been watching the room the way she always watched rooms, counting exits, measuring distances, cataloguing who carried blades and who carried debts. She was good at disappearing. She'd had 8 years of practice. But the sound, that sound, locked her body in place. The child hit the floor. Her crutch clattered sideways. Soup pooled hot against the girl's knees, and she didn't scream. That was the worst part. The girl sucked in her breath, pressed her palms flat to the stone, and went silent, her tiny shoulders drawn up around her ears like she was trying to fold herself into nothing. Lord Aldrich Voss stood above her, flexing his hand. He wore a signet ring on his striking hand, heavy gold, the Voss crest stamped deep, and there was a red smear across the band where the metal had caught the girl's cheekbone and split skin. He glanced at the blood on his ring with irritation. Not guilt, irritation. The way a man looks at mud on a good boot. "Someone remove this," he said. His voice carried. It was meant to. The tavern was full. 30 people, maybe more. Farmers and tradesmen and 2 off-duty soldiers who studied the bottom of their tankards like scripture. Nobody moved. The child's mother, a woman with flour-white knuckles gripping the bar rail, opened her mouth and closed it and opened it again and made no sound. Sarah's body moved before her mind gave permission. She crossed the room in 6 strides. She did not run. She knelt beside the girl, set her palm flat against the child's back, and felt the rapid-fire hammering of a terrified heartbeat through thin wool. The girl flinched. Sarah kept her hand steady. She said nothing. She pulled a cloth from her belt pouch, pressed it gently to the cut on the girl's cheek, and with her other hand retrieved the fallen crutch. The lavender. That's what the girl would remember later, when the magistrates asked. The woman who knelt beside her smelled of dried lavender, not perfume, but the real thing crushed and carried in a pouch, the kind herbalists and hedgewives kept for healing salves. It was in Sarah's clothes, her hair, the linen of her sleeves, faint and clean and completely wrong for a place that stank of ale and mutton fat and fear. Sarah helped the child stand. She fitted the crutch under the girl's arm, adjusted it, waited until the girl had her balance. Then she straightened and turned. Lord Voss was staring at her. He was tall, broad through the chest, greying at the temples in a way that suggested authority rather than age. His travelling cloak was embroidered with the Eastern crest, and 2 armed men flanked him, personal guard, well-fed, bored. He looked at Sarah the way he'd looked at the soup on the floor, an obstruction to be cleaned. "You're in my path," he said. "You struck a child," Sarah said. Her voice was level, not loud, not shaking. She held his gaze the way you hold a knife, firm, forward, quiet. Voss blinked. One of his guards shifted. The tavern held its breath. "She spilled on my cloak," Voss said, as if this were an explanation, as if this were sufficient. "She's 7, Sarah said, "and lame, and your cloak is already stained from riding. That is not soup, that is road clay from the southern pass. You struck her because you could, not because you were wronged." Something shifted in Voss's face. The irritation curdled into something sharper. His hand drifted toward his belt. "Do you know who I am?" "I know what you are," Sarah said. "That's enough." And that was when the door opened. She didn't hear his footsteps. She heard the silence, the sudden absolute vacuum of sound that swallowed the room when Commandant Kyle Ashford stepped across the threshold. He was rain-soaked. His dark hair was plastered flat against his skull, water dripping from the jaw, from the edge of a cloak that bore no crest and no embroidery. He was taller than Voss, leaner, the kind of lean that comes from campaigns, not courts. His face was constructed of angles and shadows, and his eyes, dark, deep-set, moving, swept the room once and understood it completely. He was the Crown's military commander for the Eastern Province. He answered only to the king, and Lord Voss, for all his signet rings and guards, technically answered to him. Sarah watched Voss's spine stiffen, watched the hand drop from the belt, watched the guards step back, not away from Voss, but away from the problem. Ashford said nothing for a long moment. He looked at the child, at the blood on her cheek, at Sarah's hand still holding the cloth, at the shattered bowl and the spilled soup and the tavern full of people who were pretending to be furniture. Then he looked at Voss. "Lord Voss," he said, just the name, but his voice did something Sarah hadn't expected. It dropped, not in volume but in temperature. It went cold the way deep water goes cold. Not a threat, a fact. "Commandant." Voss attempted a smile. It looked like a wound, a misunderstanding. The child was clumsy. "The child is bleeding. From a fall. From your ring." Ashford walked forward. Each step was deliberate, the thud of wet boots on stone marking distance. He stopped close enough to Voss that the Lord had to tilt his head back slightly to maintain eye contact. "Your signet is smeared. Her wound is crescent-shaped. Would you like to continue, or shall I?" Voss's throat moved. He swallowed something. Pride, fear, the calculation of what a military commander could do to a provincial lord if sufficiently motivated. "I'll compensate the mother," Voss said. "You'll leave," Ashford said. "I've rented the upper room for—" "You'll leave now." Ashford had not raised his voice. He had not touched his weapon. He simply stood there, soaking wet, exhausted and immovable. "And Lord Voss, I'll be writing to the Crown about your conduct in this province. Tonight. Consider your remaining time as warden carefully." Voss's face went white, then red. His eyes cut to Sarah. A look that promised something, stored something, filed her face away in the ledger of people who had humiliated him. Then he turned, snapped his fingers at his guards and walked out. The door slammed. The tavern exhaled. Sarah realized she was shaking. Not visibly. She'd trained herself out of visible trembling years ago, but deep in her core, in the place where her body kept the truths her face wouldn't show. She just publicly confronted a man who could have her jailed, beaten, or worse with a word. The child's mother rushed forward, gathered the girl, pressed her face into the small neck. She was crying. The girl patted her mother's hair with one hand and held her crutch with the other, and Sarah's throat went tight. She became aware of Ashford watching her. He had not moved. He stood in the center of the room, water pooling at his feet, and his eyes were on her with an expression she couldn't read. Not suspicion, not gratitude. Something slower, something that looked absurdly like recognition, though she was certain they had never met. "You stood first," he said. "Not a question. Someone had to," Sarah said. "No one else did." He paused. "You're not from Thornfield." "No." "Will you tell me your name?" His voice had changed. It was no longer the blade he'd used on Voss. It was something quieter, careful, formal, almost cautious. As if he understood that a woman who'd just faced down a lord might not welcome being interrogated by another powerful man. "Sarah," she said. Just that. No family name, no title. She waited for him to push. He didn't. "Sarah," he repeated. He looked at the child's mother, at the broken bowl, at the tavern keeper who was already mopping the floor. "The girl needs a healer for that cut. The nearest one is 3 miles south." "I can treat it," Sarah said. If the mother allows. The mother, a round woman named Bren, Sarah would learn later, looked between them and nodded, clutching her daughter tighter. Sarah knelt again. She pulled the lavender salve from her belt pouch, the same scent, and cleaned the cut with steady hands. The child watched her with enormous dark eyes and did not cry. Sarah applied the salve, pressed a clean bandage in place, and said, "You were very brave. It didn't hurt," the girl said, which was a lie so obvious and so dignified that Sarah had to press her lips together hard. "What's your name?" Sarah asked. "Miri. This salve will sting tonight, but feel better by morning." "Can you be brave one more night?" The girl nodded solemnly. Her mother carried her away, and Sarah straightened to find Ashford still there, standing exactly where she'd left him, watching her hands. "Lavender and comfrey," he said. "You made that yourself?" It wasn't a question. She wasn't sure how he'd identified the ingredients by scent alone, but she nodded. "You're a healer," he said. "I was." She pulled her hood forward. "I should go. It's raining. I've walked in rain before. Voss is still out there. His carriage hasn't left. I heard no wheels." He said it plainly. No drama. Just the fact that a man who'd promised retribution with his eyes was somewhere between her and wherever she was going. Sarah stopped. She hadn't considered that. Or she had, and she'd been planning to consider it outside alone, where considering things while terrified was a hobby she'd perfected. "I have a room upstairs," Ashford said. "The one Voss thought he'd rented. The keeper held it for me 3 days ago." He paused. "I'll sleep in the stable. You'll have a locked door and a bar." She turned, looked at him. The offer was so cleanly separated from expectation that it took her a moment to process he wasn't suggesting they share the room. He wasn't suggesting anything. He was giving her a locked door between herself and a vengeful lord, and he was removing himself entirely. "Why?" she asked. "Because you stood first," he said. "And I was late." She took the room. The room smelled of him, not cologne. Rain, iron, leather, and underneath it, very faintly, something bitter she couldn't name. Like medicine. Like something metabolized through the skin. She locked the door, dropped the bar, sat on the edge of the narrow bed and shook until her teeth rattled. She had been so careful. 8 years of careful. 8 years of moving through small towns and smaller villages, trading salves and tonics for bread and shelter, never staying more than a month, never giving her full name. Because Lord Voss wasn't just a cruel man who struck children. He was the man who had destroyed her family, seized her father's lands, and accused her dead mother of treason, all to claim the Marin estate and the herbal legacy that came with it. The Marin bloodline carried knowledge, generations of it. Remedies that worked when court physicians failed, cures that bordered on the arcane, though they were nothing more than deep botanical expertise passed mother to daughter for 200 years. Sarah's mother had cured the old king's wasting sickness when every other physician had failed. She'd been rewarded with land, title, gratitude. And then, when the old king died and his less grateful successor took the throne, she'd been accused of poisoning him. By Voss, whose family had wanted the Marin lands for decades. The accusation was false. The evidence was manufactured. Her mother died in a cell. Her father followed a year later, broken. Sarah, 16 and lame in her left hand, 3 fingers fused from a childhood accident, had fled with nothing but her mother's remedy journal sewn into the lining of her coat. She was the last Marin, and she had just shown her face to the one man in the province who was already looking for reasons to bury Voss. She pressed her fused fingers against the lavender pouch and breathed. In the morning, Ashford was waiting in the tavern's common room. He looked worse than the night before, paler, with shadows carved deep beneath his eyes. He was eating nothing, drinking only water, and there was a tension in the way he held his left shoulder that suggested pain he was managing carefully. He stood when she came down the stairs. That caught her off guard. Powerful men didn't stand for women with no name and no title. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Some." "You?" The stable was adequate. The way he said it made it clear the stable had not been adequate, and that he would say nothing further about it. "I should go," she said. "Where?" "East. There's a village past the river that needs. Voss controls the eastern road, every checkpoint, every bridge. After last night, he'll have your description circulated by noon." Sarah's stomach dropped. "I'm riding west to the garrison at Kale," he said. "I can offer you escort that far. After that, you'll be outside his jurisdiction. I don't need—" "You do." He said it simply, without condescension. "I don't mean to presume. I mean to be accurate. He will come for you. Not today. Today he's humiliated and cautious. But soon." She sat down across from him. The table was small, and the morning light through the warped glass window caught his face. She saw it then, the slight tremor in his hand as he lifted his water cup, the pinched look around his eyes, the bitter scent, stronger now, rising from his skin. "You're ill," she said. His hand stilled. "That's the second time you've observed something no one else noticed. It's the second time it was obvious." Something moved in his face. Not a smile. An acknowledgement, a giving of ground. "It's managed," he said. "With what? Does it matter? To a healer?" "Yes." He looked at her for a long time. Then he set down the cup. "Iron root tincture, twice daily. The garrison physician says it slows the progression." Sarah's blood went cold. Iron root tincture didn't slow anything. It masked symptoms. It buried pain beneath numbness while the underlying condition, usually blood corruption from prolonged exposure to tainted metal in old fortress walls, continued destroying the body from inside. She'd seen it before. Her mother had written about it in the journal. The cure existed. It was simple, brutal, and required exactly 3 ingredients that Sarah carried in her pouch at all times. She said nothing, because telling him would require explaining how she knew, and explaining how she knew would require revealing who she was, and revealing who she was would put the journal, the legacy, the last of the Marin knowledge at risk. She rode with him to Kale. On the second day, his horse shied at a creek crossing and he nearly fell. Sarah grabbed his arm. Through his sleeve, his skin burned like a banked coal. The fever was worse than he'd admitted. He straightened, looked at her hand on his arm, and waited. "I can hold the reins," he said. "You can let go. Can you?" Truthfully, a beat. For another hour. Then I'll let go in an hour. She didn't let go. She rode beside him, her hand braced against his forearm, feeling the heat climb degree by degree. The lavender in her pouch mixed with the bitter smell of his failing body, and she thought, I could save him. Right now. Today. If I weren't so afraid of what it would cost. They reached the garrison on the 3rd night. He had rooms, sparse military quarters, stone walls, a narrow window overlooking the western valley. He gave her the adjacent room, with the same quiet separation he'd offered at the tavern. She waited until midnight. Then she knocked on his door. He opened it. He was in a loose shirt, unlaced, and the flush of fever painted his chest red gold in the candlelight. His breathing was audible. His eyes, despite the sickness, were sharp and immediate. "Sarah, you're worse. I'm managing. You're lying." She held up her hand, her damaged hand, the 3 fused fingers. "This happened when I was 9, a forge accident. Every physician my father brought said it would always be useless. My mother made a salve that restored partial movement in 2 weeks. I can't open the fingers, but I can grip with them. I can work with them. I can make things that heal." She paused. "I know what's killing you, and I know how to slow it. Actually slow it, not mask it." He leaned against the doorframe. Up close, the tremor was visible in his jaw, in the muscles of his neck. He was holding himself upright through discipline alone. "What do you want in return?" "Nothing. Everyone wants something. Then want this. Let me help you without it being a transaction." He studied her. Then he stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. "But tell me what you're doing before you do it." "Every step," she agreed. She entered. She set her pouch on his table and named each ingredient as she pulled it out. Lavender for inflammation, whiteroot for blood purification, black fennel for fever. She heated water over his small fire, crushed the herbs and let the steam fill the room until the bitter smell of his sickness was buried beneath the sharp green of healing. "Remove your shirt," she said. "The compress goes against the chest, over the heart. The skin absorbs faster than the stomach." He pulled the shirt over his head. The candlelight moved across his body, hard planes, old scars, the ridge of his collarbone standing too sharp from weight he'd lost to the sickness. She pressed the compress against his sternum. His skin jumped at the heat. "Too hot?" she asked. "No." His voice had lowered. "Not from pain, from proximity." She became aware of the space between them, or the lack of it. Her hand on his chest, his heartbeat under her palm, fast and hard, and not entirely from fever. His breath on her forehead, the lavender in her hair mixing with the steam and the heat of his skin, and the room shrinking to the size of this, her hand, his heart, the silence. "Is this," he said, and stopped. Swallowed. "Is this part of the treatment? The compress is. My hand staying is not." She didn't move her hand. "Do you want me to move it?" "No." "Then I won't." "Sarah." He lifted his own hand, slowly, deliberately. He brought it to the side of her face but stopped a breath away. "Tell me to stop." "No." "Tell me what you want. Touch me, gently. And if I say stop, you stop. If you say stop, I stop. I swear it." His hand met her cheek. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, slid down the side of her neck. She shivered, not from cold, from the contrast, the burning fever of his skin against the cool of hers, heat meeting cool, sickness meeting the scent of lavender, and something underneath that was just him, just his body without the poison in it. And she wanted to find that underneath. She wanted to peel the sickness away and find what lived below it. She turned her head and pressed her mouth to his palm. He made a sound, low, broken, utterly involuntary. His fingers curled against the back of her neck and he drew her forward, not pulling, not forcing, simply closing distance with a pressure so light she could have stepped back with a breath. She didn't step back. She rose onto her toes and brought her mouth to his. The kiss was slow, questioning. His lips parted against hers and she tasted the bitterness of the iron root and underneath it. Warmth, real warmth, the kind that came from want and not from fever. She gripped the compress against his chest and his hand slid into her hair and he kissed her harder, deeper, his tongue tracing the seam of her lips, asking, and she answered by pressing her body against his. He groaned. His arm wrapped around her waist and hauled her in. The compress slipped. She caught it, pressed it back, and he huffed a breath against her mouth that was almost a laugh. "Healing and this," he murmured. "Can you do both?" "I'm good with my hands," she said, and his laugh this time was real, breaking across his face, transforming it. She'd never heard him laugh. She wanted to hear it again. She wanted to be the reason for it every time. He lifted her. She wrapped her legs around his waist and felt the heat of him everywhere. His chest against hers, his hands gripping the backs of her thighs, his mouth moving from her lips to her jaw to her throat. He carried her to the bed and set her down and then stopped. Knelt, looked up at her. "Tell me what you want," he said again. "Exactly. In words. I want you. Here. Now. And I want to take this slowly enough that I can feel everything. Then we go slowly." He unlaced her bodice with steady hands. She'd expected urgency, from him, from herself. But he held to the pace she'd asked for, peeling fabric away one layer at a time, his mouth following each inch of exposed skin, his lips against her collarbone, his breath on the curve of her breast. The compress lay forgotten on the bed behind her. She pulled him up, worked his belt open, pushed the fabric down his hips. His body was beautiful and damaged, hard with muscle, burning with fever, trembling with a need that had nothing to do with sickness. She pressed her damaged hand flat against his stomach. He looked down at it, the fused fingers, the scars, and then he pressed his own hand over hers. He lifted it to his mouth and kissed each bent finger separately. "Does this hurt?" he asked. "Nothing you're doing hurts." He laid her back, moved over her. Every point of contact was deliberate, his mouth on her throat, on her breast, on the hollow of her hip. She arched into him, and he paused each time, waited for her to push toward him before continuing, reading her body with the same precision he'd read the Tavern, the same intelligence. She pulled him closer with her legs, and he settled against her, and they moved together with a slowness that was devastating, that built heat in her core degree by degree, until she was gripping his shoulders and breathing his name against his neck, and he was whispering against her hair, "Tell me if this is right. Tell me, Sarah. Tell me." "Yes. This. Don't stop." He didn't stop. He drove them both toward a peak that broke over her in waves, not a crash but a tide, pulling her under gently, completely. And she felt him follow, felt the shudder run through his whole body, his forehead dropping to her shoulder, his breath ragged and hot against her skin. The lavender and the fever and the sweat between them made the air thick and sweet and raw. He held still for a long time. Then he pressed his mouth to her shoulder. Then he lifted himself off her, dressed in silence, and left. The door closed softly. She lay in his bed, in his sheets, in the ghost print of his heat, and thought, "That was either the bravest thing I've done or the most foolish." In the morning he was in the common room again. He stood when she entered, but this time his eyes dropped, and a flush crept up his neck that had nothing to do with fever. He opened his mouth, closed it, and finally said, "I wasn't certain you'd want to see me." "You left," she said. "I didn't want to presume you'd want me to stay. I wanted you to stay." The flush deepened. The commandant of the Eastern Garrison, the man who'd faced down Lord Voss without blinking, looked at the floor. "I didn't know that. Now you do." His advisor, a stocky, grey-haired sergeant named Pole, appeared beside them with 2 bowls of porridge and a look of studied innocence that fooled no one. He set the bowls down, glanced between them, and said to Sarah with perfect deadpan, "If you want him to sleep, exhaust him. The man hasn't rested properly in 3 years. He thinks too much. Make him stop thinking." "Pole," Ashford said through his teeth. Sir Pole saluted and withdrew. His expression was beatific. Sarah looked at Ashford. Ashford looked at the porridge. That night, she went to him. She didn't knock. She opened the door, crossed the room, took his face in both hands, her whole hand and her damaged hand, and kissed him. He reached for composure, and she took it apart. She pushed him onto the bed, straddled him, pulled her shift over her head, and watched his eyes go dark and desperate. She took her time. She was thorough. She used her mouth and her hands and the full weight of her body, and every time he tried to slow down, to hold back, she whispered, "Let go. I have you." He let go. Twice. The second time he said her name like a prayer, and then fell asleep so suddenly she thought he'd passed out. But his breathing was even, his arms were locked around her waist, and the tremor, the constant bone-deep tremor, had stilled for the first time since she'd met him. She stayed. In the morning she woke to find him watching her. His hand was hovering over her hair, not quite touching. "Can I?" he asked. "You can." He stroked her hair, said nothing else. The moment lasted. But by the third night, the lavender compress wasn't enough. The fever climbed past what Whiteroot could manage. She pressed her hand to his chest in the dark and felt his heart stutter. An arrhythmic kick, a skip, a recovery. The bitter smell was stronger. It was coming through his pores now. The iron root had built up in his blood for so long that it was becoming its own poison. "How long has the garrison physician had you on iron root?" she asked. 6 months. "And before that, I was healthy." Sarah sat up. Her mind was racing. "Kyle, where does the iron root come from?" "The physician orders it from the provincial stores. Voss's supply chain." The world tilted. She pressed her fused fingers together until they ached. Voss controlled the medicine supply. Voss had appointed the garrison physician. Iron root in sustained doses didn't treat blood corruption. It caused it. Someone was poisoning Kyle Ashford, slowly, with his own medicine. She spent the next night talking. She told him everything. Not her identity, not yet, but everything she knew about iron root, about slow poisoning, about the symptoms that mirrored blood corruption so perfectly that no physician trained in standard methods would ever detect the difference. She told him about the cure, a concentrated lavender and white root decoction applied directly to the blood through an open wound. Brutal, simple, effective, something only a Marin would know. He listened for hours. He asked careful questions. He held her damaged hand between both of his and rubbed warmth into the bent fingers and said, "Who taught you this?" "My mother." "Who was your mother?" And here she broke. "If I tell you," she said, "you may not want me in this room, in this bed, in your life. That's not possible. My mother was Elara Marin." The silence was absolute. She watched his face process the name, the famous healer, the treason conviction, the execution. She watched the calculation happen. If her mother was Elara Marin, then Sarah was the missing Marin heir. The one Voss had been hunting for 8 years. The one whose testimony could unravel his entire claim to the eastern lands. "Sarah Marin," he said. "Yes, your mother didn't poison the king." She blinked. "You believe that?" "I know it. I've been investigating Voss for 2 years. The evidence against your mother was fabricated. Witness statements purchased. The court physician bribed. I have half the proof. I've been looking for the other half." He paused. "I've been looking for you. Why?" "Because Voss is a traitor. And you're the key to proving it." He lifted her hand, the damaged one, the one that marked her as broken, as less than, as someone to pity. He pressed it against his own chest over his stuttering heart. "And because you are the only person who has stood between harm and an innocent in the 3 years I've been watching this province devour itself." She started to cry. She hadn't cried in 8 years. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to hear it." He drew a breath. His heart kicked against her palm. His eyes rolled back. His body seized. He fell sideways off the bed and hit the floor, and the bitter smell exploded from his skin so thick she gagged. His back arched. His teeth clenched. Blood appeared at the corner of his mouth where he'd bitten his tongue. "Kyle!" She was on the floor beside him. His pulse was erratic, hammering, stopping, hammering. The iron root had reached critical concentration. His body was shutting down. She had minutes. She ripped open her pouch. Lavender, white root, black fennel. But the decoction needed to enter his blood directly. She grabbed his belt knife from the table, heated it in the candle flame, and made a shallow cut along his forearm. He didn't flinch. He was beyond flinching. She pressed the raw herbs into the wound, packed them, held them. The blood soaked into the lavender and turned it dark. She whispered the preparation instructions her mother had drilled into her. Not magic, not prayer. Just the precise order of application that meant the difference between cure and failure. His body fought her. The seizure intensified. She threw her weight across his chest, pinned his arms with her knees, and pressed both hands, whole and damaged, over the wound. The lavender burned against her skin. His blood was hot. The bitter smell peaked, crested, and then, slowly, began to fade. His heartbeat steadied. 1 beat, 2, 3, even, strong. His eyes opened. "Sarah, stay down." "What did you—" "I saved your life with the Marin cure that Voss wanted destroyed when he murdered my mother. That's what I did." Her voice cracked. "And I would do it again. And I need you to know that I did it because I love you, not because you're useful to me, not because you can clear my name, not because of anything except that you stood up for a child with a crutch, and you gave me a locked door, and you asked before you touched me every single time, and I love you, and I thought you were going to die in my arms." He lifted his hand, weak, shaking, alive, and touched her face. "I wasn't finished," he said. "Finished. Before. I was saying something. You were. I love you." The words came out whole, complete, unbroken. "I love you, Sarah Marin. And I am not going to die." She pressed her forehead to his and breathed. Paul found them on the floor at dawn. He said nothing. He brought blankets, hot water, and a look of profound satisfaction. Then he said, "I'll summon the garrison physician." "Arrest the garrison physician," Ashford said from the floor, "and send a rider to the capital. Lord Voss is to be detained on charges of treason, murder, and attempted assassination of a crown officer." Paul blinked once. Then he saluted and was gone. Voss was arrested 3 days later in the Thornfield Tavern, the same room. He'd returned to it, claiming lordly prerogative, sleeping in the bed Ashford had offered to Sarah that first night. The soldiers found him at breakfast. He did not go quietly. "You have no authority," Voss spat, standing in the center of the room with his signet ring gleaming and his face the color of old brick. "I am blood-appointed warden of the Eastern Province. My family has held these lands for—" "Your family seized these lands," Sarah said. She stood in the doorway. Behind her, Ashford, on his feet now, weak but upright, with the color returning to his face hour by hour. "You manufactured a treason charge against my mother to claim the Marin estate. You bribed the court physician to confirm poisoning that never occurred. You appointed a garrison doctor whose only job was to slowly kill the one man with enough authority to investigate you. And you did all of it because my mother's legacy, her knowledge, her cures, threatened the monopoly your family held over the province's medical supply. You couldn't buy her, so you destroyed her." Voss's eyes darted between them. "The girl is a criminal. She's the fugitive Marin heir. She's under Crown protection," Ashford said. "As of this morning, by sealed order. Her mother's conviction has been referred for review. Your testimony is the only evidence that supported it. When that testimony is proven false, and it will be proven false, Lord Voss, because I have the bribed physician's confession already in hand, the conviction will be overturned, the Marin lands restored, and you will face charges for the murder of Elara Marin, the wrongful seizure of a noble estate, and the attempted assassination of a crown commandant." Voss's face went through a sequence of calculations, bluster, bargaining, threats, and settled on something Sarah recognized: fear. The same fear she'd carried for 8 years. The same fear the child Miri had swallowed when she'd pressed her palms to a cold stone floor and refused to scream. "You can't prove any of this," Voss whispered. Paul stepped forward. In his hand, a sheaf of papers. The physician's signed confession. Shipping records showing iron root deliveries to the garrison in quantities that could only be intended for sustained poisoning. Letters between you and the court physician who testified against Elara Marin, discussing payment for false testimony. And this. He held up a final document, a sworn statement from Bren, mother of the girl Miri, who witnessed you strike her child. This alone would bring a censure from the crown. Combined with the rest, it brings a death sentence, Ashford said quietly. Voss sat down. He sat down hard, as if his legs had simply stopped working, and for one moment Sarah saw him clearly. Not a lord, not a predator, just a small man who had built a very large lie and watched it collapse. He put his face in his hands. "Take him," Ashford said. They took him. 2 months later, Sarah stood in the Thornfield Tavern, the same corner, the same table. But the room was different now, louder, brighter, full of people who spoke freely because the man who'd silenced them was in a cell awaiting trial. The tavern keeper had hung new lanterns. The windows had been cleaned. Miri was sitting on the bar, eating a pastry, swinging her good leg while her crutch leaned against the wall beside her. The cut on her cheek had healed to a faint crescent, a scar she wore like a badge. Sarah touched the lavender pouch at her belt. It was almost empty. She'd need to grow more. She'd need land for that. The Marin estate had been returned to her by Crown decree 3 weeks ago. The house was standing. The gardens were overgrown. The workrooms where her mother had made her cures were dusty and still and waiting. Ashford came through the door. The rain was gone. It was summer now, and the light caught the angles of his face differently, warmer, softer. The tremor was gone. The bitter smell was gone. He looked like a man who had been given back a future he'd stopped expecting. He crossed the room. He didn't stand at a polite distance. He walked directly to her, cupped her face in both hands and kissed her in front of 30 people, the tavern keeper, Mirry, and a very smug Sergeant Pole who applauded slowly from the doorway. "I have something for you," he said when he pulled back. He held up a small cloth pouch. She opened it. Lavender seeds, dried and sorted and ready for planting. "For the new garden," he said. She looked at the seeds, at his hands, at the faint scar on his forearm where she'd cut him to save his life, at his eyes which were watching her with the same expression he'd had that first night in the tavern, the look she'd mistaken for recognition. It had been recognition. He'd seen her, not a fugitive, not a healer, not a damaged woman with a ruined hand and a dead mother's secrets. He'd seen her, Sarah, standing between harm and innocence, shaking inside where no one could see, and standing anyway. "Come home with me," she said. "Is that what you want?" "That's what I want." He took her damaged hand, kissed the bent fingers, held on. They walked out together into the clean summer air, and the lavender seeds in her pocket were warm against her hip, and the world smelled of nothing bitter at all. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and the bell so you never miss a story. Drop a comment telling me, what would you have done in that tavern? I'll see you in the next one.